Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1. I love movies titles with punctuation. That's got a lot of it in there. The IMDb plot summary chronicles a multifaceted 15-year span of pre and post Civil War expansion and the settlement of the American West. Directed by Kevin Costner, starring Kevin Costner, Sienna Miller, Sam Worthington, and Luke Wilson. I should say too, we say chapter 1 in the title there. This is a planned of 4 chapters that he will be releasing over the next 2 years. Hopefully, he has the second one's already in the can, releasing next month, and then he's filming chapter 3, and then trying to get financing to complete it, and then film 4. So hopefully he does complete it. That's my take on this. I am a big, like I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, that I do associate Kevin Costner with America and based on movies, but another one is the Western, which is a quintessential American genre. I was happy to see him come back to this. And while it was a very interesting experiment in terms of how the narrative was structured, like it did feel very much like 3 TV episodes back to back. It did not at all have a movie narrative in terms of how the plot moved. And I enjoyed this a lot, actually. And I will definitely be there for part 2. I think the best thing you can do when a movie is over is end the movie in a way where like makes you feel good. And there's an ending montage where he's like, this is sort of next time on Horizon kind of thing.
Right.
Where it was like a 3-minute sequence of just shots from the next movie. And I was immediately like, yep, okay, I'm sold. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I'll get more into my more specific thoughts on it. But what was your take as someone who I don't think is as big of a fan of Westerns as I am, which I'll again admit that's one of my favorite genres.
Yeah, I'm not. But I would say it's something that more than horror, it's something that I really want to get into. And I think through the making of this podcast and watching The Untouchables and a few other movies that you put on the list, like I'm really intrigued by the genre. So I think I'm very warmed up. I just haven't had the time to watch more of the classics. So, but I think this was interesting because maybe I know too much about the backstory of the making of this, like how this Kevin Costner was on the Yellowstone, which, a huge hit TV show. And then whatever spat happens between him and Taylor Sheridan, who's the maker of that TV show. And then he basically comes out, it seems like, and it feels like he's like, you know what, I'm going to make my Yellowstone and it's going to be on the big screen. That's sort of what it feels like to me, that this is a TV show put on the big screen. Did I have a good time? I would say, yeah, like it was pretty interesting and enjoyable. I will say it feels very much like a TV show, not just in its narrative structure, but also the way it just looks and feels. And even though the West is beautiful, especially the second chapter in the first chapter, all puns intended, when Kevin Costner shows up, I think they're in Wyoming, like that whole area is just absolutely stunning. Like you want to go to all these places, but I wish he'd shot on film, but I guess there's no money left. Maybe make 1 of these or 2 of these opposed to like 12. It'll look so much better and more impactful. But there's something about the storytelling of how these things are disconnected. And I get it. Like it's all going to converge towards this land horizon, but I don't know, something about the storytelling, the way it looks, and the fact that you're also surrounded yourself with all sort of B actors. They all are sort of TV actors or movie actors who are kind of in the B tier. The whole thing just doesn't really hang together super well for me, even though there's some memorable sequences, I will say that, but I never felt the weight of it. To me, like Westerns are, from whatever little I've watched, the emotion I associate with them is that of sort of soulfulness and kind of really thinking about the past and thinking about the future and what shaped us. And of course, there's also the story of archetypes. And I think the archetype piece does come through, but otherwise it sort of fell a little flat to me. And I just kept thinking of that this is a little bit of a vanity exercise, and this kind of goes back to the arrogance part that, I'm just going to make my own thing. And it made me think of him and his career in a larger sense where he's not really worked with the best of the best. And I associate that with people who are arrogant, or maybe don't want to lose control, or are maybe even threatened by other people. Like you can see his fingerprints across the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I wish he'd collaborated on this movie and maybe many other movies in the past, maybe 20 years with some people, whether actors or screenwriters or whoever, who are at the top of their game, And we'll get into that more as we go through the episode. But he only worked with some best of the best people when he was starting out.
Hmm.
Since then, he hasn't, and I think it caps you. And I see that in this movie. If this is like the summation of his work and trying to say movies, I think it's held back because it's just him, and you can only get this far on your own.
That's fair. I mean, I think getting more into like the business thing in this. I mean, he's not in the movie for the first hour. That was actually really surprising
No.
to me. And then he
Yeah.
does get that incredible sort of like hero's entrance where the
Yeah.
camera, like he rides into the camera and there's that swell of the amazing score, and yeah, they're in this big,
Yeah.
amazing Wyoming plane. And I'm like, okay, Costner's here. Like this is great. Because in the first hour, which is dealing with this beginning settlement out in New Mexico, where there's this really actually very well done Indian raid where the Native Americans come
That's
in
actually very
to
well shot.
that was cool. Even though I'm like, okay, I don't know who these characters are, but then you
Right.
eventually get to know them over the course of the rest of the next 3 hours. Like the pacing of it was very much like, okay, here's episode one where you're meeting some guys, a big thing happens, and then those guys like get affected by what happened on the raid. Episode two, we have another storyline of now Kevin Costner coming in and what's going on in Wyoming with him being like this man with no name type gunslinger who sort of comes into
Mhm.
town and how he gets involved with this kid. And that storyline was, in my mind, the most interesting one. Like much like in a TV show, sometimes you're not really going to care about certain characters, and the plot's going to kind of slow down a little bit. And I felt like that in terms of the pacing. But I think if it was a vanity project, it would have been more about him, is what my point was. And he is an actor on screen, even though those are my favorite parts, and I kept waiting for the Costner storyline to come back. It wasn't just all him. Postman, for example, a movie I guess I'll say we're talking about later in this episode, he is like front and center of that. He wrote, he co-wrote it, he directed it, he is in almost every scene. And I think that this is definitely not something like that. And yeah, on the arrogance thing, which I know he's been heard to be difficult to deal with sometimes, and very has a vision in his head and trying to execute it on the screen. But he did win Best Director on his first going of making a movie. And I think that
Yeah.
does go to your head immediately. So it's like, why would I work with other directors? I want to get my own projects off the ground, because not only was Dances with Wolves, the first movie he directed, very financially successful, but also it won Best Picture and Best Director. So I
Yeah.
think that makes it harder for me to like, okay, let me step back and now be in
Yeah.
some other director's hands. Like that's tough. So maybe that success came too early in his career, which I think
I
is
think
was
so.
definitely valid. But I also respect that he has this artistic vision that no one else wanted to do Dances with Wolves. And he cared so much about that story that he actually made it happen, and it was a huge hit. Postman went the other way. And then Open Range, another Western that he made, is actually his previous film to this that he wrote and directed from, I think it was 2003. A really awesome Western, like really solid. Again, a story that I don't think any other director would have pushed for to be told. And I think that's another great movie. So that's what I respect about him. And with the Horizon, even more so, because he's putting his own money into it, which is like the one thing you're never supposed to do in Hollywood. Like
No.
never put your own money in, but he's doing it. And I think that's cool. And this experiment also narratively of, what if we took television in terms of a narrative style and approach and just put it in theaters? Will people show up? Will it work? I was very mixed on that will it work thing until the end of the movie. And then I sort of was kind of getting what he was doing. And I've been thinking about this movie ever since I saw it last week, and definitely going to be there opening weekend for part two. And it's kind of cool to have like a TV show that you're getting to go to the movies for. I don't know.
I don't know.
It's working for me. Like I'm definitely was this the best movie I've ever seen? No. Was it the best thing he's done? No. But I'm there for it. And I think it's only gonna get better as they started weaving in more of like, what's the point of this? Because in the first, two, actually most of the movie, I was like, hey, what's really the point of this? Like, what is he trying to get
Yeah.
at? None of these characters are meeting. What is he trying to say? And I think at the end of the movie, when they showed that montage, and it's really
Right.
making it clear that it's this story about this quote unquote town called Horizon, and then
Mhm.
some guy back east is selling land out here, and people are kind of settlers are going out there, assuming that this is going to be their new life, that everything's going to be great, and it's really hard. And then also there's other people that live there, the Native Americans, and it's like, wait a second, what's going on? And it really reminded me actually of a previous episode we did. I think it might have been our first America episode, where you were making this point that America is all about like marketing essentially. Like we have these things that we
Mhm.
quote unquote stand for, but it's not really real, but it's like we're trying to always sell this
Mhm.
idea of what America is. And I think that eventually might be his thesis with this entire
Yeah.
project, because the movie's about this idea of this town Horizon, that you can go west and it's going to be this paradise and this Eden and go, it's going to be great. And all these people are going out there for their own individual reasons, but it's not because it doesn't
Yeah.
exist. And it seems like there's going to be some twist where, Giovanni Ribisi seems to be revealed as like the bad guy, this guy selling this land and lying on these flyers. And maybe he doesn't even own rights to the land because it seems like the Native Americans are like, why are these people showing up? This is currently our space. So that to me is like when I realized that, like at the end, I'm like, okay, this is sort of what the point of this is. It makes me even more excited to see where it goes as those themes start like getting hit on the head a little bit more. Then this it was really just setup of all these characters,
It's just set up. Yeah.
set up with
Yeah.
no payoff, which was it's sort of the movie kind of just ends. But it ends in a way where I was also comparing this to like Dune Part 1, which I found very unsatisfying as a
Mm.
first half. That movie to me, those two movies feel like one movie cut in two. So it ends without like a second or definitely not a third act. I'm like, okay, this feels really weird. Like I didn't like how I felt when I left the theater after Dune 1. Whereas this, it just sort of ends and I'm like, okay, there's a next episode next week kind of thing. Like I know the narrative is unfolding. And I don't feel so unsatisfied in a way, but I don't know. What did you think about the ending?
Yeah, I mean, I would not
It's just
compare this to
ended.
Dune. I mean, I know in what sense you're saying, but like Dune 1 is an amazing experience with the way it's put together, the way it's acted, the world building, all of it is totally incomparable in my mind. In fact, I even prefer Dune 1 over Dune 2. I'm
Hmm.
not bothered by that aspect that it's sort of chopped up. And I
Yeah.
think Dune 1 is fairly contained in my mind.
It doesn't not it didn't
To
really
me,
work. It doesn't work for me without the
yeah,
second
but
one. Then
this
it's
is
like great,
like, I don't know what, just stick to TV or make a movie is what I would say. This is, and the numbers are telling the truth, right? Like this is a
Hmm.
bomb, and I don't know if anybody's going to show up for part two. And I feel
We'll see.
some people will. I mean, surely it sounds like you are,
I'll definitely be
but
there. Yeah.
I don't know how big of a thing it's going to be, just given how much has been spent on this, So yeah, I'm all for experimentation and trying things out. So, props for that. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't think this works.
Yeah. I think that for me, the jury's still out until all 12 hours of this are done. But so far, I'm willing to go where he's going to go. And
Mm,
yeah, this is an experiment for sure. And maybe it's not going to work. But I also, whenever directors or studios or whatever try something, I just respect that. Like I like
yeah,
the, sort of Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas kind of experimentation thing where they're just going to try stuff and
yeah,
sometimes it totally doesn't work, but sometimes it does. And I like that Costner is in that same camp too, where he's wagering himself to try something and in a new way. Like maybe this could be movies. Now, it's probably not going to be, but I like that
yeah,
he's doing something instead of just what the studios are doing, which is churning out, more Despicable Me's and more Marvels, and
right.
like that's what they like. That's not going to be. You got to do innovate, and
Yeah,
sometimes you innovate and it doesn't work. But
I agree.
yeah,
I just think like the format is one thing. I just think that the character development and, I wish he was working with better people. If you
yeah,
don't
the
have
act,
much on the page, then
yeah,
if you have good people, they'll bring the story. The truth is that the script is very light. There isn't much character development, and the whole thing looks like a TV show. So to me, those are the big
mm,
things. It's not so much the episodic treatment, because if this was the best movie he wanted to make, who cares how long it is? Who
hmm,
cares how chopped up it is? I will show up. The truth is that it's not great, and you're asking so much from your audience. You're putting your whole life on the line.
yeah,
Make it great. If you're going to experiment, go out with a bang. And I don't think this is what that is. And
yeah.
that's my
Yeah,
issue.
that's fair. I just keep thinking about this as if this was a show and I've watched now 3 episodes, would I continue on the season? The answer is yes. So then why wouldn't I want to show up in the theater? That's at least my like mental calculation. It's like
True.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
stop watching the show. I usually give shows at least one season anyway, but it isn't so boring or so uninteresting and none of it works
No.
enough where I'm like stepping away. But to your point, it's a much bigger ask to pay another $25 and go to a movie and sit in a theater for 3 hours than it is to just hit next episode on the
Right.
remote and then the story continues. So this very easily could have been on TV. And part of me even wonders that in terms of the financial structure that he has in terms of owning this entirely, that if he can't get part four finance, he might turn around to a TV network and say, look, I'll cut this up into
Yeah.
episodes. You just finance the final 3 episodes, but everything else is already done. And
Yeah.
there's very interesting ways from a business standpoint
I totally agree. I
he
think
can
it will
move
come
forward with
down to
this.
that.
It could. I hope it doesn't, because I want to be there when part 4 comes out with all the other Horizon fans dressed in costumes for our favorite characters, sitting there in the theater, like, cheering when something happens. That's what I want, but I just want the story at the end of the day to be finished. If he can't get it in theaters, then, I'll be there on Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever is around by the time he gets this thing out the door.
Gazebo TV.
Exactly. Yeah. Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.